Facebook. Today we are with Genevieve Ko, author of Better Baking, and we are going to make a green tea chocolate cake with matcha marshmallow frosting, which sounds incredible.
And you'll get a taste at the end.
Yes, so. Genevieve, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, let's get to making this cake.
Thanks. It's so great to have you here in my kitchen to bake from Better Baking, which is my baking cookbook out this fall and this winter. And my whole vision for Better Baking is to make the desserts that you love even more delicious, like way more delicious, by adding great ingredients that happen to be wholesome, like whole grains and fruits and seeds, nuts, vegetables, all these good things that will actually make foods taste even better. And in the process, you know, that it's good for you, that doesn't hurt either. So it's nice, especially around the holidays, to have these recipes that can nourish your body and soul. And especially around the holidays, I love making cookies, of course, but if you're throwing a party, I really love to make cakes. And this cake, with the Matcha Marshmallow Frosting, has this, thank you, has this tint of green, which I think is so festive for the holidays, but of course it doesn't use any food coloring. Instead it uses matcha. And matcha is a Japanese green tea powder where green tea leaves have been dried and deveined and then stone ground into this super fine powder that dissolves in hot water, and it makes for an amazingly delicious drink, but it also works really, really well in desserts. And honestly, I originally created this cake not for the holidays, but for one of my daughter's birthday parties when she wanted a bug birthday cake, and I thought, how can I make this green without adding food coloring? And matcha turned out to be the answer, because she wanted a marshmallow frosting too, which honestly I find a little sweet on its own, but matcha has obviously a flavor that is sort of tea-like and sort of woodsy and tannic, and that really cuts through sweetness so nicely. That's why you'll often see other pastry chefs combine it with white chocolate, which is quite sweet, and that's a really nice pairing, but it also tastes great with chocolate, which is why I use the matcha in the cake as well as in the frosting. So I'm going to go ahead and get started to show you how to make this cake, and if you have any questions along the way, don't hesitate to ask, and I'll be sure to answer them.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to also show you a few shortcuts to making this cake, because I love the holiday season, but I'm already feeling the crazy from all the busyness that surrounds it. And so one of the things that I do sometimes when I have a lot going on is I'll actually prep my ingredients ahead of time, so when it's time to actually bake the cake, and I can just throw it together. So I often will put all my dry ingredients in these deli containers, and you can use any sort of airtight container. And I'll remind myself with a sticker on top saying, okay, what do I actually have in here? Because it is very easy to forget whether or not you actually added that, you know, pinch of salt or whatnot. So once I have all these ingredients already in here, all I have to do is put them into my sifter. And this is a fun sort of old school sifter that I got from a garage sale. But you can use any sifter or sieve. And the reason I'm sifting for this cake is because there's a lot of cocoa powder in it, and cocoa powder does have a tendency to clump, and it's so hard to get those clumps out once you add the wet ingredients. So it's much easier to just go ahead and get rid of them in this first stage. If you can see that your cocoa powder is really fine and unclumpy, then you can just skip this step, but I just like to make sure I have 0 clumps in there. So in the book, I actually call for making this in a stand mixer where you would sift the ingredients into the stand mixer. And I do that because I'm just lazy. And if you have a stand mixer, it's so much easier to just get everything in there and have the machine going while you add the wet ingredients. But if you don't want to pull your stand mixer out, or if you just want to bake a cake by hand, this is a great batter that works really well by hand. So you have all your dry ingredients here now, and I've sifted it, and I'm just giving it a little whisk to make sure everything's mixed up really well in there. And now I'm going to do my wet ingredients. And again, I've prepared some of them ahead of time, I've mixed them ahead of time, and I've put them in the fridge, but I do like to have my wet ingredients at room temperature. So this has been sitting out at room temp for a bit, and this is a combination of buttermilk, vanilla, and grapeseed oil. And I forgot to mention here that in addition to the cocoa powder, this says whole wheat pastry flour, baking soda, baking powder, salt. And this is actually all whole wheat pastry flour. So this is 100% whole grain, which yes has that added benefit of fiber and all that good stuff, but really the reason I do it is because there's a nuttiness in whole wheat grains that tastes so great with chocolate and with cocoa. And in this cake, it just really accents the green tea as well. And what I have here, and now it looks like swamp water. It looks pretty gross, but this is actually the matcha dissolved in hot water.
Okay.
So if you're looking for matcha in the stores, you can find it in various forms. So this is matcha that you can actually drink as well. This is a much more concentrated formula of matcha than what you would drink because I want it to flavor the cake in the way that you use vanilla or another seasoning. So it won't look like this if you're making it to drink. But to be totally honest and upfront, matcha is really pricey. You can imagine because you're drying and grinding tea leaves. But you can buy actually culinary grade matcha, which is probably not something you want to drink. I'm sure it won't be terrible, like you won't get sick or anything from it. It doesn't taste as great as really high quality matcha. But in the form of a cake where you have a lot of chocolate and a lot of other flavors going on, you can absolutely use culinary grade matcha instead. So I've dissolved that matcha here in the warm water and I brought it to room temperature because even though you want your ingredients all the same temperature when you're making the cake, you don't want one of them to be hot because that's going to cause the flour to clump and it's just going to cause all the ingredients to be all weird, and it's definitely not what we want.
Don't want that.
No. And the same thing is definitely true of the eggs, right? So if you forgot to pull your eggs out and bring them to room temperature, one of my favorite tricks that I pull out all the time because I always forget to bring my eggs to room temperature is to cover them with warm water in a small bowl. You don't want, again, hot water because you don't want to cook your eggs, but just warm so that they'll come to room temperature. And it just takes a few seconds, or not a few seconds, a few minutes to get them to room temp. So once you do that, you can add your eggs to the same measuring cup where you have your matcha water already. And I do this because, again, I don't love doing dishes. I try to minimize them whenever I'm baking, especially at home. You know, it's just no fun to be left with a ton of dishes at the end. So what you can do is you can actually mix all your wet ingredients in the measuring cup so you don't have to dirty another bowl. And even though I measured these other ingredients out earlier, you can just throw them all in here. And another super quick way to minimize dishwashing even more is actually by using a kitchen scale. So the way that you would have done that with the dry ingredients and the wet ingredients is that you can actually put the bowl that you're going to use right on the scale, turn the scale on, and just add the ingredients until you hit the number that you want. So throughout Better Baking, I actually did all the ingredients both in volume measurements with measuring cups, but also in grams. And I actually love baking with this scale, both because, again, it eliminates having to wash all those measuring cups, but also because it's so much more accurate. And when you're dealing with things like whole grain flours and nuts and seeds and things that just settle differently in measuring cups, it's really nice to be able to make sure you're getting exactly the right amount. So if you're using a mixer, you would just have this in the mixer, put on the whisk attachment, set it on low, and add the stuff. But it is just as easy to do this, just to whisk it by hand while pouring in your wet ingredients. And one thing you need to do before you start this process is you actually need to set a wet kitchen towel on the counter to set your bowl on so that the bowl doesn't go sliding as you're trying to whisk, which is so annoying. I know that they're
flying everywhere.
I know, right? You definitely can buy, or maybe you even have the sort of bowls that have those non-stick or those sticky bottoms. I don't know what they're called. They have like grippy bottoms so that you can eliminate this wet towel step. But if you're like me and you just have regular bowls, then this is what you want to do. And as you can see, I'm sort of gradually drawing the flour in from the edges because I don't want to have huge clumps. If you just dump all the wet ingredients in at once really quickly and then try to whisk it by hand, you're going to be getting quite a workout trying to get rid of the dry ingredient lumps. And once you get going, once it's all added in there,
you can smell that chocolatey.
Yeah. And I don't know if you can get a hint of the matcha, this sort of, it has almost like a smoky, like a really faint smoky flavor, right? Or scent, I should say. And you can see I'm whisking pretty vigorously here. And oftentimes with cakes, you don't want to do that, right? You don't want to work the gluten so hard that you end up with tough cakes. But pastry flour has pretty low, whole wheat pastry flour has a pretty low gluten content. And I do want the cakes to be a bit airy. And since I'm whisking by hand, I just want to make sure I get this really nice and smooth. So there you go. There is your cake batter. And I like doing this as a 3-layer cake. And you can just divide it now among these cake pans. And one thing you could do, if you want to get really professional about it, and sometimes I do, you can actually weigh the amount of batter here and then put your cake pan, you can put your cake pan on the scale, you know, divide the amount by 3 and then pour in the amount that you're looking for. Or you could be like me and just sort of eyeball it and just dump it in there. And I do start with a little less. You can see I just made sure I covered the bottom because I want to try to get it as even as possible just by eyeballing it. And you don't want to, you know, use it all up in that first pan and realize that you're going to have a layer that is so much thinner than the other ones. That being said, it's not the, you know, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's not the end of the world. If that happens, you can always pull out the thinner cake layers earlier, and then you'll be all set. So here we go. And see, it's a good thing that I did not add too much in the beginning because this is just the right amount. So you can also use your wet towel now to wipe up the drips from the cake. So you want to just swirl. If it hasn't reached the edges, swirl a bit. And you can see here, see there's a little air bubble because I was whisking so vigorously. And if you want to get rid of that so you don't have a little pock on your baked cake, you can just drop the pan. I know it's loud, sorry. But I like to do that anyway with all of them because I don't know if you could see that, but you have lots of tiny bubbles here. I'll just do it one more time so you can see. You see all those tiny little bubbles?
Yeah.
And it's not going to prevent your cake from rising, but it will prevent lots of holes in your cake.
Okay.
Yeah, so now we're just going to throw these in the oven. And they bake really quickly. You don't want to overbake these cake layers, so make sure you keep an eye on them. And you know when they're done, and one way you can tell is certainly by sticking a toothpick in there. Make sure you don't have any crumbs. But the other thing you can do is just give the cake a little tap. And what you want to see is
Here's the finished guys.
Yeah, they've already cooled, so it's a bit difficult to see. But right when they're still warm, when you press it, it shouldn't leave an indentation. It shouldn't. Well, if it bounces back, you've taken it a little too far already. But that's ideally you're going to have no indentation, but a tiny, tiny bit of a bounce back.
Genevieve, we have a question from Julie. Couldn't you also bake it in one cake pan and then cut into 3 layers after it's baked?
Yeah, absolutely. I've done that before. I've done it in a half-sheet pan, so you can then make it into like a 3-layer rectangular cake, like a pave. Again, you just want to adjust the cooking time. It depends. If you're doing it in like a 13 by 9, it's going to be thicker, so it's going to take longer to bake through, and you could just do it then as a single-layer cake with frosting right on top. So you can absolutely do that. But in the case of like a half sheet pan, if you're going to do that to cut it into layers, or you can even, you know, do the half sheet and then cut rounds, just make sure that the bottom is lined with parchment. Oh, I didn't even show you that. So I grease the pans, line them with parchment, and then grease them with parchment again, just to ensure that it comes out cleanly, because chocolate cakes, they can stick, but that's definitely something you want to do.
Awesome.
So chocolate cake alone is delicious, and you can actually eat this as a snack cake. That would be super tasty, but it's the holidays, and so you want to add a little pizzazz to your cakes, especially if you're entertaining. So we are going to start by making our marshmallow frosting. A marshmallow frosting is basically a meringue frosting where you have a lot of fluffy egg whites, and what we're doing today is what's called a Swiss meringue, where we're going to cook egg whites, which we have here. We have 4 egg whites here, and we are going to cook them with sugar and cream of tartar. And maybe cook isn't quite the right word, but we're going to get them nice and warm. And then we're going to beat them so they get really, really fluffy and soft. And my thing with marshmallow frosting is, again, is that it's often too sweet, so that when you take a bite, you're like, oh, my teeth hurt, and you get a headache. But it's a great flavor, and it's a really nice alternative to buttercream, especially around the holidays when everything is so sweet and so sugary and so buttery that you need a little break sometimes. So marshmallow frosting is a great alternative where you're getting a fluffy, moist frosting, but you're not getting all the richness of sugar. I know, it's going to blow, but don't worry, it's not. That's right. And the other thing that we do, The other thing I like to do, I know I kept talking about having your ingredients at room temperature, but that's especially important when you're trying to whip egg whites. Now it gets a little tricky because when you're separating the eggs, it's much easier to separate eggs when the eggs are cold. The yolk sort of just pops off from the egg white. And you can either do it with a shell method or you can crack the whole egg and pick the yolk out, but that's much easier to do when the eggs are nice and cold straight from the fridge. But the eggs will actually whip much more easily and much more steadily when they're room temperature. So if you do remember to plan just a little bit ahead of time, it's really only like 20 minutes. Just have your eggs, separate them. You can do it before you even start baking the cakes. And then just let the egg whites sit to bring them to room temperature. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and put the sugar and the cream of tartar with the egg whites. And the cream of tartar is going to help those egg whites rise really nicely and evenly. And we're going to go ahead and just whisk it off heat here just to get them mixed up. And I'm going to see how our water is doing. It's great. And you don't actually want the water boiling like this because you don't want to cook these eggs at all.
Okay.
You just want to get them warm. So we're going to take it down to a simmer. And maybe a little more than a simmer. We're going to rest our bowl in there. And I did this so that the bowl is not touching the hot water on the bottom because again I don't want it to cook. But what I do want to do is I want to keep whisking while the pot is simmering, while the water in the pot is simmering. And I don't want to stop whisking because again I just don't want to have cooked eggs. Not only because that would be really gross in a frosting, but also because the eggs actually won't whip up properly. And what you're looking for here is you want the sugar to fully dissolve, and you can see that that's happening relatively quickly already. And you want the egg whites to be warm to the touch. And I really like to get this so that it hits 140 degrees, which I think is a really nice temperature for whipping into a really billowy frosting. Okay. If you're at all concerned about eggs not being fully cooked, you can take the mixture all the way up to 160 degrees and you'll still get a nice marshmallow frosting. You're getting a little close to having the egg whites be cooked, and so it makes it a touch harder to whip into frosting. But if you are concerned at all, by all means go ahead and take the egg whites all the way to 160, but 140 is my ideal, and I like to buy good eggs from good farmers where I know that we're not going to get sick from the eggs. So if you aren't worried about burning yourself, you can actually feel the egg whites, and you want to feel that right now, it's sort of the first stage where I can feel that there's no grit left from the sugar, and you can sort of see that there's no grit. And right now it's just lukewarm, and I want it to get to warm from lukewarm. But if you're at all concerned, like I don't really know what that means, like what is warm, what is lukewarm, you can then get a candy thermometer, which is much easier to use in a mixture like this than an instant read meat thermometer. You can get a candy thermometer to check the temperature of the egg whites. And if you're going to do that, what you want to do is you actually want to take the bowl off the heat because it's going to keep cooking and it's going to keep warming up. And the way I check the temperature, as you can see, is I'm going to tilt the bowl and I have the thermometer facing down because the bulb that's registering is on that side. And I want to make sure it's getting an accurate reading. So I'm tilting the bowl so that I have it immersed in the mixture, and I can see that it is exactly 140 right now. I don't know if you can see that. But it is. And so what we're going to do then is transfer this to a mixer. And this is a case where you really do want a mixer because it would be such a workout to do this by hand. And I have to be honest, I have never even tried to whip it by hand. And so we're just going to pop the whisk attachment in, and you want to do this relatively quickly. And you want to start on a lower speed just to get everything going and gradually raise the speed. And you can see that the foaminess of the whites is already starting to form underneath that sort of spittle-like liquid layer. And then you can just sort of keep going and let the mixture really start whipping and take it up eventually to a medium-high speed. And right now, the bowl is hot. And what you're going to do is you want to let it keep going until the bowl is actually room temperature. And you're going to watch this actually transform into a really billowy frosting. So we're going to let that keep going for a while. But since it's a bit noisy, I actually already have one that's whipped to the right temperature. But I want to show you too. So I have it on a medium-high speed. And you could make it go faster. But I've found that when you're whipping egg whites or whipped cream or anything where you're creating bubbles and you want to hold those bubbles, it's actually really nice to whip it at a steady medium to medium-high speed because that actually causes the bubbles to hold longer and firmer, which is just a really nice alternative to having a collapsing or weeping meringue or souffle. So we have here one that's been whipped to the right consistency. So this is what you're looking for.
Different texture here.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
So you can see it's actually not quite as stiff as I want. The top is still drooping down quite a bit. I wanted to not take it all the way because I knew that we were going to come back to this in a second. So we're just going to take it for like one more second here. And now that we've got it, oops, it's still not quite there, but we're going to take it just a little bit longer. And once we do that, what we're going to do is we're going to add our seasonings. So again, this is the sort of thing where, you know, if you're in a rush and that's as far as it goes, you'll be fine. But we do want it to hold a stiffer peak than that. It almost gets like a tacky, gluey sort of consistency.
Anne-Marie is asking, do you prefer one of your stand mixers over the other?
Oh, well, I have to confess, these are actually both KitchenAid mixers, and I do love KitchenAid stand mixers. I love them both, and I actually use them for different things. So as you can see, these are actually different sizes.
Yeah, so this is more of like the professional,
this is the professional size.
and then this is more of the standard kitchen size here.
I guess that's the Artisan series. That's the 5-quart, and this is a 6-quart. I use this if I'm doing bigger batches or bigger doughs. I use this one too, actually, if I'm doing bread doughs. It just gives the dough a little more time to slap around in the bowl. So what we're going to do is let this come up to the right consistency. And to color the dough, we're actually just going to toss in, here's more matcha powder.
And Michael is just joining us. Michael, we are making a marshmallow matcha frosting right now to go on our green tea chocolate cake.
Yes, that's what we're doing. We're making a matcha marshmallow frosting. I add matcha and vanilla. I just love the flavor combination there. But you can actually use your mixer to whisk in these add-ins, so you don't have to do it by hand. And you can see the color changing now.
Be a little noisy for a second, viewers.
All right. So here we have our matcha, it's like a tongue twister, matcha marshmallow frosting. And you can see it's nice and glossy, and now you can see that this is the stiffness that we're going for. And you can
it's
see
such a nice, like, faint green. I love the color of it.
Yeah, it just reminds me so much of winter and pine trees, and it's not sort of that garish, that garish green that you often see. I also actually, in Better Baking, I also use matcha in rainbow bars, and that's a really fun thing to make for the holidays. I have to confess, I've been making them all year, and people have been going crazy for them. But it has a similar effect, where you can see, So, you know, rainbow bars, usually there's a red, green, and white layer that are like neon from food coloring.
Yes.
And they're my favorite, just one of my favorite cookies. I thought, how can I get that same color without using food coloring? So the red jam is sort of my red, but the matcha layer is so nice with the almond batter in that cookie. So if you're using matcha and you want to think of another way to do it, those rainbow bars are definitely a great option.
Genevieve, Sandra is asking if there is decaf matcha powder out there.
Oh, I do not know, Sandra. That's really interesting. I actually don't know, but I can look into it. And if you ask on Food 52, I can definitely respond. So I will look that up. So, and I should mention, matcha powder you can find. It's become such a hot drink. I feel like you can find it in regular supermarkets. I got mine at actually one of them at Stop and Shop, which is like a northeastern major supermarket, and just local markets. Tea shops, any sort of tea shops that specialize in teas will probably sell matcha, but you can also easily find it online and just order it online. And again, if you're into drinking it, you can totally buy really delicious drinking quality matcha, but you can certainly also buy that culinary grade I showed you.
Right.
So to frost this cake, I actually frost this cake leaving the sides open because this frosting is really tasty, and you just don't need a ton of it on the sides. And I actually just love the look of that.
Yeah.
And so what I do is I usually start by choosing my ugliest layer to go on the bottom. And I know this looks terrible because the top came off, but that doesn't matter. I thought this had the nicest dome.
Okay.
I think this is my ugly guy.
Okay.
See this? I don't know. That was my bad. Trying to get out of the pan. I lost a little of the side. So I'm going to put the ugly guy on the bottom. And I'm going to put it right onto my serving platter so that I don't end up having to transfer the cake later. So there are a few different ways you can do this. You can totally just take about a third of the frosting and plop it on. That is definitely an option. You can take an offset spatula or a butter knife, a spoon, whatever you like. Though I have to say, 4-inch offset spatula is one of the tools that you will love and use all the time for everything if you're a baker. So, and they're not expensive, so I would definitely suggest getting one.
I love how glossy the frosting is too. It looks really beautiful.
Oh, thank you. And it's super tasty.
Yes.
So.
Lisa said she wishes this live video had a smell option.
Yeah, you know, you smell here, you smell the tea, and there's a really lovely smoky scent to matcha. And you know what I did with the frosting is, you saw I did add sugar. You need the sugar. You need the sugar to whip the whites. There's no two ways about that. But I use just enough sugar to get this perfect glossiness without getting that tooth-aching sweetness. So then you take your second layer. You can see these are nice sturdy cakes. And I actually am still going to do it the bottom side up here, so that you have a flat layer for your middle. And you can push down a little, give it a little squeeze so you can see your green popping out the sides. And this time I'll show you another trick for frosting. So what I have here is I have just a Ziploc bag. This is a gallon-sized Ziploc bag. And I'm sticking one corner of it into a quart-sized deli container so that I can put half of the remaining frosting right into that bag. And I am creating here an impromptu pastry bag. And because this is still your metal layer, you don't have to worry so much about decorating, but what you do have to worry about is making sure you squeeze all of your frosting into the corner that you're going to be squeezing out of, because otherwise it's going to be a hot mess of frosting coming out the other side of your bag. So once you got all the frosting in that corner, you're going to twist this side so it's nice and tight, and then you are going to have scissors, which I did not have on hand, and then you're going to grab scissors and you're going to snip a hole in the corner. And one way to sort of ensure that you have the right frosting is just to squeeze it in a concentric circle here, so that that's what you're going to see when you're coming out. And that is Charlie, my dog Charlie. And look, if you're like me and that did not come out in perfect concentric circles like you thought it would, it's totally fine. That's what the offset spatula is for. But what I did do, as you saw, the most important thing is that I got this ring around the outside so that when you put the cake layer on top, you're going to see this perfect ring.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the goal. So nobody can see that middle. It doesn't matter if it's like ugly. Okay,
I have a question for Sarah.
Yeah, of course.
Which ways is your cookbook different than other baking cookbooks? It's called Better Baking. So
yeah, for sure. So Better Baking, I think, is really unique in that the goal is to make desserts actually taste better, have more interesting and complex flavors and textures by adding wholesome ingredients that are healthful too. The goal is not by any means to create diet desserts or healthy desserts, because to be totally honest, I think that sounds gross. But I love baking for people. Like, that's what I always want to do. I want to bake for people to nourish those kids who just came home from school and caused my dog to go crazy, and for friends and for family. And when that's the goal, especially when they were little, but even now, I wanted to give them sweets that were actually good for them too, that are going to have added benefits in addition to those great flavors. And that was really the origin of the book. It was their first, those are my twins that just came in. It was their first birthday, and I wanted to create a birthday cake for them that was not only super tasty, but also just filled with wholesome ingredients. And from there, I've been baking like this for like the past dozen years and doing so professionally. And so that's really, I think, what distinguishes Better Baking. You have these wholesome desserts, but they are coming from somebody I'm really a baker at heart, and I want things to taste great first and foremost. It's not about like trim down, slim down, or whatever. It's about making things taste really great. And especially around the holiday season, I always want to bake things for everyone, no matter what they can and can't eat. So there are, in fact, lots of options in here if you're vegan or gluten-free or grain-free, or you can't have eggs, or you can't have nuts, or you can't have dairy. And I created those recipes for friends who couldn't eat those things anymore, so that they could have something that was even more delicious than anything they remember before. And there are other recipes in here that actually are gluten-free or whatnot that are that way just because they taste better that way. I have these hazelnut chocolate chip cookies where there is actually no added flour, because I just want to taste the straight up hazelnuts.
I love that.
Yeah, it's oh my goodness, it's super intense in a great way. So that's really what distinguishes Better Baking. You have something for everyone in here, and they really are desserts that nourish your body and your soul.
We're gonna have to put a link up to the schoolhouse. Sorry, I'm getting
the school party sheet cake.
We actually have a video up on Food 52. We have the recipe on Food 52, but there's a really interesting frosting that you use on that cake.
That's right. So I created the school party sheet cake, and the goal was to create a cake for my kids' school parties that was delicious enough that everyone would eat without, being like, what is this thing? But at the same time, it is loaded actually with vegetables. There's zucchini in the cake, and the secret ingredient in the frosting is actually sweet potato. And you can see the video on Food 52. It's a 2-ingredient sweet potato frosting that will take you like 5 minutes, and the kids go crazy for it.
I love it.
They love it. They totally love it because it's so silky and creamy and sweet.
Julie is asking if you could use a gluten-free flour in this recipe, this cake.
Yes, so I'll be totally honest, I didn't create gluten-free recipes for the sake of creating gluten-free recipes, and I'm actually not a fan of the one-to-one flour mixes, just because I find them a bit difficult to work with, but also, I don't know, I just don't really like the flavor. So what I did instead was I just created a bunch of different recipes that work really well, without any grains or without any gluten. So for this particular cake, this is really, this is a wheat-based cake, but there is a cake in Better Baking in the cake chapter, I think 2 pages away from this one, that's a collapsed chocolate souffle mousse cake, and that has no flour at all, that has no grains at all. It is so delicious.
That sounds delicious.
Yeah, so it basically has the consistency of chocolate mousse in cake form, and you could absolutely make that cake and use this frosting. That cake I did with a I'm a chocolate hazelnut person, if you haven't been able to tell already. I do that with a chocolate hazelnut ganache, but you could absolutely use that cake for any of the chocolate cakes in this book. Okay, so the final technique I want to show you is if you want to go all pro and use a pastry bag fitted with a coupler and a tip, you can definitely do that too, since this is your top layer. And you can do sort of any number of things. You can create little dots, which is what I'm going to do here for a sort of graphic pattern. You can make rings around if you want, or honestly, the way I like doing this, and this is not how we're going to actually frost it, I just wanted to show you how you can use a pastry bag. But I actually love creating desserts. This is like one of those like dessert disasters right now. But I actually love creating desserts. It just looks really natural and swirly. So even though you can use a pastry bag with a fancy tip to create that, my favorite thing to do with this frosting is ultimately to just go ahead and swirl it. And so it just has a nice glossy sheen, as you can see. And there you go, there you have it. And we can definitely cut into this now and take a big old bite. But if you are serving this for a dinner party, this is great for make ahead because you want it to be made ahead. You can see right now, I think as you saw as I was swirling, it was like doing a little dance and getting a little jiggly. You do want to give the cake layers and the frosting some time to set and melt together. Okay. But I do think you deserve a slice. You've been so great. And I think people would love to see.
Yes, I'm going to come around actually, get a little bit closer on this cake. Yep. So here we go. And here is Genevieve Ko again as well.
Yep. I'm just going to grab a slice for you to taste. I guess maybe I should get a fork too, because this is sort of a fork, a cake that you want to eat with a fork. So you can see too when you're done if you want to adjust it. But it's a really lovely cake for the holidays. It goes, I would say it goes with just about anything, but even though it's this big old tower, it doesn't feel too heavy because both the layers and the frosting are nice and light. So there you go.
Someone says it reminds them of Oreos.
Awesome. Well, you know, the cake does have that sort of cocoa-iness
right.
That Oreos do.
Well, this has been amazing. I'm definitely going to need to dig into a bite of this. Thank you so much for having us, Genevieve.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, and if everyone has any other comments, leave them, and we can check in later. And we'll also put up a recipe to that cake that we were talking about.
All right, sounds good. Happy baking, everyone.
Thank you.